Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. This week's video was requested by a viewer of the channel, a guy called, his name's at Judd Lofthouse, who's very supportive, and it's following on from the last video I done about why I'm not in a band, and I gave you a brief kind of history of my journey through music. And a pivotal moment for me was touring with Paul Weller in 2002. So I'm just going to tell you the story of how I got the tour and sort of pre-post, everything that went on in between, highs and lows, and telling you where I went wrong as well. I had to write down a kind of a brief history, because obviously it's like 23 years ago, and yeah, I had to kind of Google a few little different bits and bobs as well. But there's also a guy who has done like a review of the first few shows, so I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out, have a little read of that. I think he's only reviewed about 3 or 4 of the gigs, but anyway, so I'm sort of repeating myself on it. Oh, by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do me a big favour and subscribe to the channel. A load of you that watch haven't subscribed yet, so if you could do that, that would really help us out. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm going to repeat myself a little bit in some of these videos, but just to give you a bit of a backstory, picked up guitar at 92, got into the Britpop thing when it came along. For me, when I first heard Paul Weller, which would have been around 93, 94, he was like my light bulb moment musically, because I loved Oasis. I was kind of into Blur at that point as well, obviously with the Battle of Britpop and everything that went on. But Paul Weller was like completely different. I loved his voice, I loved the way he worked. Even to this day, he's still a massive inspiration to me. But particularly the 90s output had a massive effect, inspiration on me, influence and whatnot. So when I started writing songs and recording and doing demos, I started sending stuff to record labels, which is what you do in the 90s, you know. Obviously there's no internet back then, so sending my demos to record labels, and you know, you get like the letters back, you know, thanks but no thanks. And I thought, well, something inside me was like, I'm going to send some demos to Paul Weller, because I thought if anyone's going to give me a chance, I imagine he would. Why I felt like, I don't know, but I just did. So I started, what year is this? So this is about 2001, still recorded about 3 tracks at a studio, and I started sending him this demo, or to his studio. Now, prior to doing this, I had a day up in London going to like Island Records, I don't know, Sony Records, whatever it was. I was going to record labels and literally knocking on the door, handing them a demo, and then going to the next record label, and that's what I was doing. Now, I was obviously, I'm about 17, 18, bearing in mind, around 2000, I'm about 17 or 18 maybe. So I'm very young, very naive, but I'm, you know, in love with music, love with writing my own songs. I've been in and out of bands, as I've said in that previous video. And I think 1998 or 99, Google was out. So I think I may have done a little bit of Google researching on certain bits and bobs. Now I know he had a studio which was near Marble Arch, I believe, and I went there. And by that point, I walked in there and I was like, can I hand this to Paul Weller or whatever, this demo I had? And they were like, no, his studios aren't here no more, which I was really gutted about at the time. I still handed them a demo and all that. But so that was Solid Bond, Philips Recording Studios, Stanhope Place near Marble Arch. That's what I've Googling it recently, see where it was. So I must have done a bit of researching, and I can't even remember, but I managed to get hold of the name Black Barn Studios, and I managed to find a number, and I can't remember if it was just on Google or whatever. I cannot remember for the life of me, but I got a number. So I started phoning up his studio and spoke to a guy called Charles Rees, who's now a really good friend of mine. And I'd send him demos and phone him up every sort of week or two. I might have a month off from phoning them, phoning them back up, and each time I phoned, I was like, hello, is John or Paul Weller there, please? And it was ridiculous. And a few times phoning up Charles, I could hear him on the phone like, no, they're not here. Well, how can I help you? You know. And I was just like, I've sent a demo to Paul for him to listen. I'd love to support him. You know, you let me know if you get the demo. And a lot of times I said, yeah, we've got your demo. We'll let you know. And my whole thing was like, I'll stop phoning when they either give me a support slot or tell me to F off, basically. And a few times I spoke to Kenny Wheeler, which was really cool. And, you know, he said the same thing. They were all quite nice, to be fair. They never told me to stop phoning, you know. They were like, yeah, well, we got your demo. We'll have a listen. We'll let you know, blah, blah, blah. And this maybe could have gone on for a year or two, I think. And I would have periods of not phoning them. Then I'd be like, you know what, I'm going to send them some more demos and phone them up again. Funny story, I phoned up one time and I went, hello, is John or Paul Weller there? And John picked up the phone and I immediately froze, because this whole time of me phoning the studio up asking for Paul or John Weller, it got to the point where I kind of got quite confident, like, yeah, it's Paul or John Weller there, please. No, okay, no worries. But this time when he picked up the phone, it just completely stunned me that John had picked up the phone. Again, he wasn't horrible, he was really nice. He was like, yeah, well, we'll have a look, mate, you know, and whatever. Can't think exactly what he said, but I was ecstatic that I actually got to speak to John. And at that point, I guess I must have thought, well, you know, I've just spoke to John Weller, so you can't get closer than that, right? So anyway, time had passed. I was in my old blue Ford Escort car, travelling around Dover somewhere, and the radio was on, and it advertised Paul Weller at the Leedscliff Hall in Folkestone. This is 2002. I immediately got kind of excited with all the phone calls I've made, and I phoned them up at my then girlfriend's house. Spoke to Kenny. I said, hello Kenny, it's Kevin here. I've heard you playing at the Leedscliff Hall. Could I get a support slot, please? And he's like, mate, look, we've got support sorted. You know, if something comes up, we'll let you know. So, all right, okay, put the phone down. Literally within a minute later, the phone rang at my then girlfriend's house, and it was Kenny. And I thought he's going to tell me, right, mate, stop phoning. We've had enough of you. And he went, right, we'll give you 15 minutes. I was ecstatic. I was like, thank you so much, you know, blah, blah, blah. And bearing in mind, I'm like 19 at this point. It's quite an emotional one for me as well, because it just makes me smile. So, Leedscliff Hall. Now, also at this time, I'm gigging in around Kent and stuff. And at the time I was playing, I can't think of the guy's name, but I was playing at a pub in Hythe that was run by Steve White's uncle. So when I got to the Leedscliff Hall, I got there really early. Just have a drink a minute, sorry. I hope I'm not skipping over anything here. Let me just have a look. Yeah, so get to Leedscliff Hall very early. Paul Weller walks through. I say I'm 19 years old, so I'm really excited. I'm a massive fan. But also, the thing for me is I wanted everyone to look at me like a serious musician as well. Like I'm there not just to be a fanboy. I'm here because I want a career. I want a career in music. So I didn't ask for any photographs, no autographs, anything like that. John Weller came down. I said, oh, hello, mate, I'm Kevin. And this is a funny story. There was a guy that was doing the merchandise with Paul's sister, Nikki. His name was Kevin as well. So when I said, hello, I'm Kevin, John was like, right, there's some boxes upstairs. Go and grab them with the T-shirts and bring them downstairs. I went, oh, okay. I didn't know there was another guy called Kevin. So I got in the lift and this lady was there. She was really happy and lovely. That was Nikki Weller, and I was like, oh, lovely to meet you. And then I think she must have said, oh, no, we're after a different Kevin, not you, so don't take boxes downstairs or anything. So anyway, went back downstairs, started tuning up my guitar in my dressing room that I had, because I wanted to look professional and all that. And then Paul came into the dressing room and was like, oh, how long have you got? I went, oh, 15 minutes. And he said, you play at Whitey's uncle's pub, right? I went, yeah, I do. So it was quite good that we had a connection to a certain degree, and you know, it wasn't just me him sending demos. He knows that, well, I do play pubs and clubs, and I do put the work in. Anyway, there was me, there was little Barry was playing after me, and then Paul was on. And Paul said to me before he heard me play, he said, look, are you doing tomorrow night at the Winter Gardens in Margate, which is just down the road? I said, no. He said, come along to that. And I said to him, well, look, you know, let me know what you think first, and then if you're happy, then I'll come along. And he said to me, if you're shit, I'll let you know, which is really funny. But yeah, so second night was in Margate. Let me turn this page over. So 3rd of July was Folkestone Heathcliff Hall. 4th of July was Margate Winter Gardens. And bless my mum and dad. My mum and dad said to us, look, ask if you can get the rest of the tour. And my dad was like, look, because you know, my dad works in the gas works, in the gas industry. We had a pub. The mum and dad owned a pub at the time as well. And they said, look, see if you can get the rest of the tour. And my dad was like, I'll put you up in a hotel. I'll drive you to the venues. Be me and you. Ask him if you can get the rest of the tour. So I asked Paul. Paul then spoke to Kenny and said, oh, he wants to do the rest of the tour. And I was just sort of stood there like, this is really surreal. And Kenny said, well, it's up to you, Paul, you know. So he said, well, we can't put you up in a hotel. We can't get you to these gigs. If you can get yourself to the gigs and sort out your own accommodation and food and everything, you can have the same slot at each gig. Now, he had a big tour. He was going to Spain. He was doing a few other bigger sort of events and whatnot. But the gigs they give me after Margate was Middlesbrough, Carlisle, Leicester, Southampton. I think that was it. So it was about 6 dates in total. Obviously at that point, I'm not that clued up on the internet. Didn't have a website. Was selling CDs at the gigs, but had no real way of connecting with the fan base, you know. My dad was kind of managing me, but my dad worked in, you know, in the gas industry, you know, and he was all about digging holes and laying gas mains. You know, when it came to music, we didn't know what we were doing, you know. A few little funny incidents was, you know, we done Middlesbrough. That was a great gig, and Paul was like, you know, how'd you get on after my set? And I went, oh, the sound wasn't that great, because I wanted to stay professional and like I didn't want to just kiss arse all the time. And he was like, yeah, that was me. I was fucking about with it. Excuse my French. Sorry for swearing, but it was funny, right? John Weller and Kenny Wheeler playing cards backstage. I remember seeing that. And also on the bill was Proud Mary. Yeah, Carlisle Sands Centre. That was quite cool because by the time I got to Carlisle, that's obviously the 4th date I've done. Oh, by the way, Folkestone Heathcliff Hall was the 3rd of July. Margate was 4th of July. 5th of July was my 20th birthday. So on my 20th birthday, I've gone to my mum and dad's pub. I think it was just me and my then girlfriend. And I didn't do a lot. I was just on cloud 9 at that point. So Carlisle, got to that gig, and here's what I'll say about John Weller, right? He come into my dressing room for that gig, and he said, are you getting paid for these gigs? I went, oh, no. I said, the payment is just being here and doing the gigs. And he said, fuck that. If you don't get the money, the promoter does. So I've told him you want $250 per gig, which basically covered fuel, covered a hotel. But that was about it, really. You know, probably didn't even get that some day gigs between me and my dad. So we made sure I got paid, you know, and that's John Weller for you, I think. And also at that gig, at one point there was me, my dad, Paul, and John Weller, kind of stood in a circle. And then Paul said to me, the demos you've been sending me are crap. They don't represent you that well. Go and record it in my studio and do a demo of what you're doing here. Just do that. So in between the dates, I think we would have gone to his studio to record with Charles Rees, just an acoustic demo, which I have got on CD somewhere. And then the other dates I've done was Southampton Guildhall, where the barriers didn't arrive, and I had to play out. Well, barriers didn't arrive. Kenny Wheeler said, I'm really sorry, mate, you're not going to be able to play because we need to wait for the barriers to arrive for health and safety. We've got to get Proud Mary on, so we're going to have to cut your set. And Proud Mary, I think they had to shorten their set from like, I don't know, 25 minutes to 15 minutes, something like that, or whatever it was. So I'm stood there all glum, and Paul's mum's there, and she come up to me and said, what are you doing? I went, oh, I'm not playing. So she was like, why don't you get on the steps and play? And I've already sort of said this story in a previous video. And so she grabbed hold of Steve Craddock, said, go and introduce Kev on the steps, let him know the barriers aren't arriving. So we went outside. Steve Craddock introduced me and said, yeah, the barriers aren't arriving yet. And I played my set on the steps. I mean, a lot of people were just wanting to get in, really. But anyway, it was what it was. But a very memorable gig, that. And the last gig I did with them was Leicester de Montfort Hall. You weren't allowed to take drinks in the hall or anything like that. So I had a real small audience. But Paul watched me at that gig, which was just phenomenal. It was so nice to look at the side of the stage and see him, which was amazing. Another cool thing, which I think happened in Carlisle, was when me and my dad and John were talking. John was telling us about him going to record labels with holes in his shoes, and at the time my dad lifted his shoe up and he actually had a hole in his shoe. So he said, oh, we're actually going to go and buy some clobber in a minute because I've got holes in my shoes here, which was really, and we all had quite a laugh about that. So it was just nice being with me, my dad, you had the Weller clan there, and it was very much a family affair. And like Steve White, Damon Minchella, they were all very supportive. I say I was only 20, I just turned 20. So after that day, he had Hyde Park. I really wanted to play on that, but the bill was already sorted. Little Barry played on that gig. Can't think who else the support was now. But I got backstage for that. That was really cool, hanging out there. And then I recorded at a studio with my band. I ended up putting a band together because through Steve White, Damon Minchella and a few other people, they got me an interview with a guy at V2 Publishing. So we go to V2 in London, we go up the stairs, meet this guy, can't even remember what the guy's name was now. He said, yeah, put a band together and then come back to us with, you know, record some demos and let's hear it. So like, right, cool. So I put a band together. At the time, it was my mate Scott Byer and my bass player, who I've been playing with for years, Chris Weeks. We went up to Paul's studio, recorded a demo. Paul did come in, actually, and was sort of there hanging about and whatnot. And we recorded the demo. When we went back to V2, we went downstairs to this guy's office. Now, bearing in mind, I'm super naive, and I supported Little Barry at that time as well, because they had a gig at Blow Up Club in London. And he listened to the demo, and he's like, yeah, you should try getting a support slot for Stereophonics or someone. I thought, well, they're on V2, that'd be great, yeah. And he listened to it, he said it was pretty good. We left, and as we got outside and was going to cross the road to go back to the car and that, it's me, my dad, my band members. I said to my dad, so what now? And my dad was like, I don't know. I have no idea. But he said, I'll tell you what I do know. The first time we went and saw him, he was upstairs. The second time, he was in the basement. And my dad was like, that's not a good sign. I'm like, right, okay. I didn't know what to do. Now, a little bit after that, I ended up supporting Ocean Colour Scene at a couple of dates. I can't remember the exact dates. This was at the end of 2002, I believe, September time perhaps. And that was at Brixton Academy. That was my first time at Brixton. I'm supporting Ocean Colour Scene there. And then the other gig I did with him was Birmingham O2. And there was me, the Real People. They were the other support band who were excellent. And then Ocean Colour Scene. And Chris Craddock at the time, Steve's dad, he got me an interview at Universal, which was mad, going to Universal. Saw a guy there, and again we left kind of like, I don't know what's going on. He listened to my demo, asked me a few questions. I can't even remember what we spoke about, and we left, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. I didn't see a point in an interview if I don't know. There was just no interest there. The other guy I went and saw was Andy McDonald, who used to own Go Discs. And at that point, his label was called Independiente. And that was a label that Paul was signed to. And I think, speaking with Steve White, he said, take your guitar, because he'd like that, and take the demos. And at that point, I hadn't done the band demo yet, and he listened to every single track. I had about 4 or 5 tracks on the demo. Took my guitar, didn't play it though, and he said the same thing. Yeah, get a band together. Let's listen to what the band sounds like. So then I ended up cancelling all my gigs, my local gigs. So I thought, well, I'm on tour with Paul Weller now. Bearing in mind I'm young, I haven't got a clue, really naive. And so I cancelled all my gigs because I'm touring with Paul Weller now, right? And when I'd sent the demo of the band to Andy McDonald, I made a phone call and said, have you got the demo? And his secretary was like, yeah, it's on his pile. And at that point I was like, all right, sod it, put the phone down, won't bother with him again then, which maybe was the right thing to do. And then I ended up rebooking loads of pub gigs and stuff, and it all kind of faded away. And I'm not going to lie, it messed with me a little bit, because I was 20 and I didn't know what was going on, didn't know what was happening. And a guy I know, he did do me a website, but nothing was really working for me. And then I carried on with the band, and then obviously we changed our name to a different band name, and I just sort of come away from it all. I've done some more demos at Black Barn, and I've recorded there on and off over the years. Even recently, I'll be going there in a couple of weeks, hopefully, to master a couple of new tracks I've got. But it's not necessarily a sad ending, really, because to be honest with you, I don't think I was right at that time, but I was very naive. But a few things that I'd learned from it that maybe, you know, if you're even in the industry now looking to get somewhere or whatever, the one thing I'll say is like John Weller had even said when he used to go and take demos to record labels when he was with the Jam, and or with Paul after the Style Council or whatever, and he said the labels would sit there and go, yeah, it's quite good. He'd just say, look, give me that demo and go elsewhere. And I think you get a lot of that. I think some people are like, yeah, we'll have an interview, and I don't know if maybe it's an ego thing for some people at labels. I mean, this is back in 2002. Things are completely different now, but I always thought I needed a manager, or I always thought I needed a tour or someone to go on tour with, or a big name. Where I think what I've really learned is it's completely and utterly down to you, what you do and how well you get on. You've got to do the work. You cannot rely on anyone. And like with me, rather than stopping all my gigs, I should have upped my gigs maybe, you know. I should have kept badgering other people, maybe for support slots, you know, and try a different route. But I kind of thought that when I got to a certain place that managers and people would pick me up and take me to where I needed to go, and it doesn't work like that. And especially like nowadays, you know, I mean, if I had the tools that I've got now and I was on that tour, you know, or had a tour come up where it was like 6 dates or something, I think I could probably, I don't know, I reckon I'd definitely get well, I don't know if I'd definitely get somewhere, but I think it would go down very well, you know, with TikTok and Facebook and all of these tools we've got nowadays. But back then I didn't have a social media page or anything like that. There was no way of me connecting with a fan base. And some bands and that would do email lists and all that, and I just didn't bother with it. I mean, obviously I've had other really good gigs and good stuff go on since then, and also I've made a connection with Charles Rees at Black Barn Studios. Like, as I say, I'm going to be going up there in a couple of weeks. And the other thing as well, I've never given up. And you know, I've supported other bands like locally to me, and I've worked with Steve Craddock. But yeah, it's a real shame to kind of go up to a certain level and then kind of come back down and it kind of fade out and then try to work it all out again. But you know what? I'm still at it. I'm still doing it. I think the main thing that keeps me going now is the love for music. I love it. And also, if I gave up, what would I do? I'd do nothing, right? So so it was a really good learning curve, and that's basically the story of the Weller Tour. You know, and even since then, when I joined the band Dogs, we went to Weller's studio to record some demos and whatnot. I keep saying whatnot a lot, apparently, and my mate Joe Fent took the mickey out of me the other day. He sent me a WhatsApp message saying you keep saying whatnot all the time, so I apologise about that. But yeah, that's basically the story. It's a bit of a kind of a sad, it isn't a sad ending, but it would have been nice if something had happened, but I probably wasn't ready. You know, I don't think my songs were strong enough. I don't think I was a strong enough musician or singer. And it just wasn't right. You know, all the everything's got to be in its place. You know, you've got to be the right place at the right time. I think for me, I was at the right place but at the wrong time. You know, whereas if something came up now, I think I'd be able to sort of grab the bull by its horns and know exactly how to kind of harness it and stay in touch with the fan base. But obviously now I'm probably, I don't know if I'm too old, I don't know, but on we trot. So anyway, I'll leave that story there. If there's any questions or whatever you want to know, let me know in the comments. If you've had a similar experience, if you've been on tour with a band, the one thing I will say is that I can't stand it when people say, oh, we almost got signed. Because to me, you either get signed or you don't. There's no almost. No one almost signs people. You either do it or you don't. And it is a fickle business out there. And yeah. So anyway, yeah. Drop some comments. Let me know what you think. Or not what you think, but if you've got any questions, or if you yourself have been on some big tours, or if you've ever had experiences that sort of elevated you at a certain period, let us know in the comments. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next week. Take it easy.